The primitives are a group of simple predefined objects in AutoCAD that can be used as the basis for 3D modelling. They can be further edited or combined to create more complex objects. The 7 primitives shown in this view are the box, the cylinder, the cone, the sphere, the pyramid, the wedge, and the torus. And you can create them by using the flyout on the modelling panel of the ribbon. You can see each of them here. In addition to the 7 shown, there are also 3 other primitives on the palette: the elliptical cylinder, Frustum cone, and the Frustum pyramid. In this tutorial, you'll be learning how to create all of these primitive objects. Creating primitive objects in AutoCAD is pretty straightforward, and many of them work in very much the same way as their 2D counterparts. So for example, creating a box is not that much more difficult than creating a rectangle, and creating cylinders and spheres is not much more difficult than drawing circles, for example. Let's start with the box. All we need to do to begin with is to draw a rectangle. Click one point, click another point, and then a third point gives us the height of the rectangle, like that. Now obviously in many cases we want to draw a box of exactly the right size, so let's just erase this box and see how that works. Start box again, pick the first point. Now this time, instead of picking a second point, we can enter a width and length using coordinates. So I could say, for example, 1000, 2000, and enter. And then I could enter, say, 3000 for the height. And that gives us a box of known dimension. Now there are some useful options on the command line for creating boxes. Very often you might want to create a cube. We can do that very simply. Click on box again, pick a first point, and notice that on the command line we have cube as an option. I can type C for cube, and immediately the box is constrained as a cube, and all I need to do now is enter the length of one of the sides, say to 500, enter, and now we have a perfect cube with 2500 unit sides. Next up is the cylinder, and the cylinder lives on the modelling panel on the primitives flyout here. And it's very much like drawing a circle, so we begin with a centre point, a point on the circumference, and then a third point gives us the height of the cylinder, like that. Now once again here we can enter specific values for those dimensions. Start the cylinder, pick a centre point. If I want a radius of say 1500 and then a height of say 2000, I can enter them like that. Now you'll notice that on the command line you'll see a number of options here: 3-point, 2-point, tangent, tangent, radius, and those are very similar to the options that you have available when you're drawing a 2D circle. There's one other option there called elliptical, and this allows us to create an elliptical cylinder. Click on cylinder again to start, but this time before picking the center point, enter E for elliptical. Pick point 1 on the elliptical axis, and then point 2, and then a third point defines the eccentricity of the ellipse, like so, and a fourth point for the height, like that. Now in fact this elliptical cylinder is identical to the one created using the elliptical cylinder tool on the palette over here. The third of the primitives on the modelling panel is the cone. And this works in a very similar way to the ones we've already seen. We start by defining the base circle, so we pick a center point for the circle, a point on the circumference, and then a third point defines the height of the cone like that. Now once again, there are some options on the command line which are quite useful. We can specify base circle by 3 point, 2 point, or tangent, tangent, radius. And again we have this elliptical option with the cone. Let's just erase the one we've just drawn and try that. Begin cone again. This time type E for elliptical. We pick one axis point, a second axis point, a third point to define the eccentricity of the ellipse, and then a fourth point for the height of the elliptical cone. Now we can also create a frustum cone using the cone tool. Let's just erase the one we've just drawn. If we begin cone again and pick a base point for the circle and then a radius for the base of the cone, you'll notice that on the command line we have an option that says top radius. Now if I type T for top radius, we're able to define a radius for the top of the cone. So let me just pick a point like that, and then a fourth point to define the height of the frustum cone like that. And once again, this option is identical to the frustum cone tool on the palette over here. Next up is the sphere, and the sphere is possibly the easiest of the primitives to create, because all we need to do is to specify a center point and a circumference, and there we have a sphere with just 2 pick points. However, there are a couple of things that are worth mentioning here. It's not obvious immediately, but if I just use the view cube to change our view slightly, you'll notice that the sphere is always created with its center point on the ground plane, and the result of that is that half the sphere is above ground and half the sphere is below ground. And this may not always be convenient. We might, for example, want the sphere to sit exactly on the ground plane. Now the only way of doing that is to make sure that we know what the radius is, so that we can move it up by that amount and have it sit exactly on the ground plane. Let's erase this sphere and create another one with a known radius. Sphere, pick the center point here and enter a radius value of, say, 1500, like that. Now we can use 3D Move. We can select the sphere, we can pick a base point wherever we like, it defaults to the center point, constrain movement in the Z direction, and then just enter the radius again, 1500, like so. Escape to deselect, and now we can see that the sphere is sitting exactly on the ground plane, like that.